When I went to seminary, we had to take the biblical languages, Greek and Hebrew. There's actually a third biblical language, Aramaic, but so little of the Bible is written in Aramaic, a few chapters in Daniel, a couple of chapters in Ezra, one verse in Jeremiah, that they didn't make us take Aramaic. Hebrew and Greek are hard enough, especially Hebrew. First, we had to learn the letters, and that's a big obstacle. At least in Greek, most of the letters kind of look like our letters. In fact, a lot of our letters are directly derived from the Greek letters. But Hebrew letters look nothing like anything that's familiar. Here's a fun fact. Greek letters are derived from the Semitic family of languages that include Hebrew and Phoenician. And thus, there's a direct line from the first letter of the Hebrew and Phoenician alphabets, which is Aleph, and the Greek letter Alpha. The letter actually started off as a picture of an ox. And if you squint and turn your head just so, nah. See, that's what a few thousand years of sloppy handwriting will do for you. Not only do you have to learn the Hebrew letters, but you have to learn to read from right to left and to start at the back of the book and work your way forward. After you've learned that, after you learn the Hebrew alphabet, you move on to learning words. Words are the true building blocks of language. Once letters move beyond representing things like oxes and houses to just representing sounds, something that revolutionized writing, words became the most basic units of meaning. Words mean things. In that respect, they're like numbers. Numbers mean things too, but the difference between numbers and words is something called polysemy. In other words, numbers mean one thing and only one thing. A 2 is a 2, regardless of context, whether it's 2 apples or 2 ducks or 2 ones, 2 tens, 2 hundreds. 2 is 2. Math isn't possible if 2 sometimes means 3, depending on context. I know because I tried numerous times to convince my math teachers that my answer was actually correct if seen in the right context. Words, on the other hand, almost always have multiple meanings. Dictionaries aren't thick because there are so many words. I mean, there are, but dictionaries are thick primarily because the vast majority of words have so many meanings. The only words that have just one meaning are pronouns like I or we, and numbers in word form. Pretty much everything else is polysemic. Thus, when a child runs, that's different than when an engine runs, which is different than when a nose runs. A deer runs, but sometimes deer walk on a deer run. When I run all over town, I'm usually driving because to run all over town would be exhausting. Or take the simple word pig. This is a pig, but so is this, which, is kind of insulting to the pig, the cute one, not the disgusting one. But here's the thing. Whereas mathematics can't work if numbers have more than one meaning, language is pretty boring if words only have one meaning. Language loses its richness. Poetry would basically cease to exist. Metaphors depend upon polysemy. Jokes wouldn't be funny and lovers couldn't describe their passion. A man who says, "My wife is a jewel," would get weird looks. And a woman who says, "My husband is a rock," means she married up. If words were limited to one meaning, Shakespeare, Milton, Twain, and Faulkner would be reduced to writing owner's manuals and software instructions. And literature would essentially be math using letters and words. And you know how much fun that is. But there's a reason that mathematics is classified among the sciences and literature among the arts. If precision is your thing, language is going to frustrate you. Language is for those who are comfortable with ambiguity, who thrive in multiverses where one thing can be multiple things at once. Now, towards the end of the 19th century and through much of the 20th century, Christian biblical interpretation started approaching the Bible scientifically, subjecting it to the rigors of the scientific method. Now, I'm not one to react with knee-jerk opposition to what came to be known as higher criticism. I've actually found much of higher criticism to be of much value. Unlike Christian fundamentalism, which rose in opposition to higher criticism, and most of that opposition came in the form of knee-jerk variety. The irony is that higher criticism and fundamentalism are opposite sides to each other, but they're opposite sides of the same coin. Both treat the Bible as a scientific artifact to be dissected and scrutinized, and both use science to do it. The difference is that while higher criticism uses science to say that, like, the Red Sea crossing couldn't have happened, fundamentalism has tried to use science to say that it did, using unusual moon tides or strong winds and shallow reed sea waters to prove that it could, and therefore it did happen. In which case, it wasn't a God-given miracle at all, just a natural event that happened at just the right time. I mean, if there's a miracle, it's in the timing of the natural event, not that the event itself was supernatural. Like I said, I really don't have a problem with higher criticism. It's just that it has its limitations, and it often misses the point. You can subject the Mona Lisa to scientific scrutiny. You can analyze the composition of the pigments Da Vinci used. You can measure the amount of light being reflected or absorbed by different parts of the painting. You can calculate the ratio of the area of her face to the total area of the canvas. And maybe you can even divine the identity of who the young woman actually was. But none of that really tells you much about the essence of the portrait. The way that it moved people in a way that other portraits of the day failed to. I mean, how do you measure beauty? What's the formula for an ambiguous smile? How much does love weigh? I don't treat the Bible that way, and I don't think you should either. This is the first in a series of messages that I'm going to do on certain words in the Bible that I think you ought to know. Part of the series will be on Hebrew words you should know, and part will be on Greek words you should know. And I am shamelessly stealing this idea from a book by Matthew Richard Schlemm, which is called 70 Hebrew Words Every Christian Should Know. Schlemm is professor of Old Testament at Dubuque Theological Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa, so he knows what he's talking about. Some of the Hebrew words I'll cover are in his book, and some aren't. And obviously the Greek words I'll cover won't be found in his book. I don't know if he has a New Testament colleague who has or will produce a similar volume covering Greek words. But if you want to get his book, if for no other reason than to check the validity of what I'm saying, go ahead. I would encourage you to do so. He wrote it for lay people, so he assumes that the reader has no background in Hebrew. And one last thing before we look at the first word. This is going to be an episodic series. In other words, unlike most message series that run consecutively for 6 weeks or whatever, I'm just going to drop these in here or there. I'll probably do another one next week, but who knows when I'll do the next one. You'll know when I know. Okay. So I've made you wait long enough. So let's take a look at the very first Hebrew word that I think you should know. It's Qavah, which means wait. Wait. No, seriously, wait. Qavah means wait. Wait, what? You mean that of all the Hebrew words we could look at, like the Hebrew word for righteous or the Hebrew word for salvation or the Hebrew word for fear, the one I'm going to start with is the Hebrew word for wait? Yep. I'll probably get to those other ones, but you're going to have to... Waiting is a huge concept in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word Qavah appears in some form almost 100 times in the Hebrew Bible, more than the Hebrew word for salvation or deliverance. It was something that the people of God were told to do all the time. Abraham and Sarah were already old when the Lord promised them a child, and they had to wait 25 years for that promise to be fulfilled. The Hebrew children were told to wait while Moses went up on Mount Sinai to meet with the Lord. And the Jewish people waited so long for a king from the line of David to arise to deliver them that many gave up altogether and missed it when the Messiah finally arrived. Wait for the Lord, the psalmist says repeatedly, which is not something you have to say to people who are good at waiting. And the Israelites were definitely not good at waiting. Abraham and Sarah got so tired of waiting, she convinced Abraham to have a child with her servant Hagar. The Hebrew children got tired of waiting for Moses to come down from Mount Sinai, so they made a golden calf and started worshiping it. And so many people got tired of waiting for the Messiah to arrive that they put their hopes on false messiahs that ultimately led to Jerusalem and the Second Temple being razed by the Romans in 135 after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And that's just a few of the examples that I could give you. Not that they were any different than the rest of us. No one likes to wait. And it starts early. Ever told a toddler to wait? That always goes well, doesn't it? When you go to see your doctor, what's the first room you enter called? A waiting room. Conjures up all kinds of fond memories, doesn't it? I think some offices have started calling it a reception room, but who are they kidding? There's no reception happening there. Where's the punch bowl and the itty-bitty sandwiches? No, it's a waiting room. And they've come to learn how cranky we get when we have to wait very long, so they've kind of broken the wait up. The first part of the wait happens in the waiting room, and right about the time you're getting tired, they call your name and take you to another room. They ask you a few questions and then they leave, and you wait a while. And then a technician comes in, takes your vitals, and enters some things into a laptop and then tells you that the doctor will be there in a few minutes. And then you wait some more. Then the doctor comes in and spends his or her 5 minutes with you, and all told, you've probably waited 30, 45 minutes, but because they've broken it up, it doesn't feel so bad, and so you aren't quite so cranky. I haven't been to a big amusement park like King's Dominion or Busch Gardens in a long time, but when you think about those places, you think about all the cool rides they have and the roller coasters and stuff. But after a whole day at one of those parks, what have you spent most of your time doing? Waiting. And you paid them money for that. All of us spend lots of energy trying to reduce wait times. We buy our carrots already scraped and shredded, our veggies in microwavable bags, and meats already seasoned. When we don't want to wait for glue to dry, we use super glue. And if you can't wait 5 minutes for super glue to dry, guess what? There's an accelerator that will cure super glue instantly. We can't even wait for super glue to dry. No one likes to wait, but waiting is a part of life. Everyone waits. What if we focused less on reducing wait times and more on what we're waiting for? What if we focused on the thing that's in the distance and not the distance itself, on what's just over the horizon and not how far away the horizon is? What would that look like? What would you call that? Oh yeah, that would be called hope. The Hebrew word for hope is tikvah. It's formed by taking the Hebrew word for wait, Qavah, and adding the Hebrew letter tav to the beginning. That would give you tikvah, which if you say it often enough, pretty soon you'd be pronouncing it tikvah. See, in the Bible, waiting is closely associated with hope, and hope is closely tied to waiting. For instance, one of people's favorite verses, one of the ones that makes it onto posters and coffee mugs and stuff, is Isaiah 40:31. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. You hear the hope, the anticipation, the expectation that's expressed? This isn't just sitting around passing time, being bored and looking for things to make the wait go quicker. This is waiting with purpose. And perhaps the verse that's most likely to be seen on a poster or a coffee mug is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. But you know, this verse isn't written to a high school senior trying to decide what to do with his life after graduation, or to the weary mom trying to survive a son and a daughter in high school at the same time, as trying and as difficult as those situations may be. This was written to the Israelites who were left behind in the rubble that was Jerusalem after Nebuchadnezzar defeated the nation of Judah and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. All the leaders in the upper crust of Judean society had been deported to Babylon, and those left behind had to face the desolation every single day. Had to face the fact that they had believed a lie, and that lie left them in ruins among the ruins. Had to face the fact that in believing the lie, they didn't believe God. And Jeremiah comes along to give them a word of hope, that God was not finished with them yet. They still had a future, but it was a future, not a present. They would have to wait, Qavah, but except not in despair, but in hope, Qavah in tikvah. So when the Bible says to wait, it doesn't mean to wait like this, or like this. It means like this. Interesting thing about that word tikvah. I told you that letters started out as pictures of real things like oxes and houses and hands, but so did a lot of words like this one. In Joshua chapter 2, the Hebrew children are getting ready to enter the promised land, and Joshua sends 2 men into the land to spy it out. They sneak into Jericho, where they're taken into the house of a harlot named Rahab. Now, this isn't a brothel or anything. This is the house of a woman who didn't have a patriarch to protect and provide for her. Maybe her husband had died, and there were no other men in the family to protect her, and nobody else in the city would take care of her, and so she was forced into prostitution. This wasn't a career choice and more means to support a drug habit. She was abandoned, rejected, and left to her own, which also means that she didn't have any loyalty to the people of a city who didn't show any loyalty to her. So when the king of Jericho got wind that some Israelite spies were about in the city, he went searching for them. So she hid the men on her roof. And when the searchers came, she lied and says the guys had come and gone as men were wont to do at her house, but they had just left, and if they hurried, they might catch them. So the searchers took off, and the Israelite men were saved. And in return, they told her that when they came back with the other Israelites to attack the city, if she would hang a red cord out the window, they would tell the attackers to leave the house with the red cord alone. And when Jericho fell, the house with the red cord was the only one left standing. Well, the Hebrew word for cord is tikvah, the same word that also means hope. Think about those Jerusalem refugees sitting among the rubble of what used to be their homes and their hopes, being told that God has plans to give them tikvah, and seeing an image in their heads of a single home standing among the rubble of Jericho with a red tikvah hanging out the window. The ancient Israelites didn't like to wait, but neither do we. And I think that the way this manifests itself most is that everybody wants to be something without going through the long process of becoming first. Does that make sense? Nobody wants to become. We just want to be. People want to be a music star, but few people are willing to become a music star, spending endless hours practicing their instrument, learning how to write melodies and learning how to write lyrics, learning how to arrange songs, and then schlepping heavy equipment upstairs to play for 2 hours in front of a dozen people, 10 of whom are disinterested, and doing that night after night after night for years and years while they learn their craft and build a following. Or pick your profession or passion. Lots of people would like to be a great teacher, but few are willing to become a great teacher. Lots of people would like to have a successful business, but few are willing to do what it takes to become successful at business. The Israelites wanted to be the chosen people of God, but they didn't want to become the chosen people. They didn't want to discipline themselves to worship Yahweh alone and not go after other gods. They didn't want to learn to accept the foreigner with hospitality and to put up with their foreign ways and foreign habits and foreign customs. And my gosh, why can't they learn the language? They didn't want to limit themselves to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth when unleashing the fury of their righteous vengeance just feels so much better and, in theory at least, leaves fewer foes to worry about. They sure weren't going to turn the other cheek. That's just dumb. No, they didn't want to become the people of God. They took their calling to become and just skipped ahead and claimed to be the people of God right at the beginning while they were still beginners, guaranteeing that they would always be beginners and would never really become the people of God. And do we do the same thing? We want to be Christians, but are we willing to become Christians? If the fruit of the Spirit is patience, are you willing to learn to be patient? Or do you just throw up your hands and say, well, I'm not patient. That's just not how God wired me. But thank God I'm a Christian. If you're unable to forgive those who hurt you, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to try, fail, and keep on trying, making maybe just incremental improvements until finally you get it? Are you willing to become? Or have you given up hope? Have you no more patience for waiting? Look, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about forgiveness. I'm talking about freedom. You can be forgiven of your sin. That's Christ's work on the cross. But you can be forgiven and still enslaved to your former ways of life. Jesus didn't just die to forgive you. He died to free you so that you could become the person God created you to be. But becoming something takes time. You have to wait for it to happen slowly, incrementally, sometimes so slowly that it can hardly be seen. So you have to wait in hope. You have to trust the process. You have to trust the person of Jesus. You have to keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faithfulness, until that day that he presents you in completion. That is the Christian hope, and we wait for that day. Father, teach us to wait in hope, like a mother waits her 40 weeks for a new life to be born, knowing that first that new life needs to be formed, and it can't be rushed. Forgive us when we refuse to wait and find ourselves underdeveloped, not fully formed, because we cut short the process of becoming. Forgive us as well when we look at ourselves as beginners and declare that beginners is all we will ever be, all that you ever made us to be, so that we might as well just accept it. And thus we give up on the hope that you have in us, that it could ever be brought to completion, that which was begun in us. Help us to see not just where we are, but where we've been and where you are leading us. And help us to see that in others. Help us to remember that for most people, we don't know where they've been, so we don't know how far they've already come or how far they're going. May we give them the grace to be who they are and the grace to see who they are becoming, and pray that they give us the same grace. as you have done for us in Christ Jesus. Amen.